Welcome to the June edition of FCA's monthly safety advisory call. Due to past experience and knowing how busy we all are during the summer months, this is going to be a pre-recorded webinar. But if you have any questions, as always, you can reach out to the FCA Safety Helpline where we'll be happy to address your concerns. So today's presentation is going to be on heat stress prevention. This is a timely topic as we're in the middle of a heat wave here in the Midwest and are expected to experience a lot more heat this summer. So why do we need to worry about this? Well, workers suffer thousands of heat-related injury and illnesses each year. So we need to make sure that we're protected from it. I'm going to share with you a quote from the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh. So, tragically, the 3-year average of workplace deaths caused by heat has doubled since the early 1990s. These extreme heat hazards aren't limited to outdoor occupations, the seasons, or geography. From farm workers in California to construction workers in Texas and warehouse workers in Pennsylvania, heat illness, exacerbated by our climate's rising temperatures, presents a growing hazard for millions of workers. And this really comes clear when we look at the dozens of worker-related deaths from exposure to environmental heat that happen each year. And these numbers are really way too high. These affect many different industries, and the finishing trades are definitely one of them. Whether we're working in exterior, dealing with environmental hazards from heat, sunlight, or we're working in interior buildings that do not yet have HVAC systems. And as we put latex paint on the walls, or taping compound, we're going to raise that humidity, impacting that heat index. So we want to make sure that we are watching out for our employees. And 18 of the last 19 summers were the hottest on record. So regardless of where we stand on climate change, we must address and realize that the summers are getting hotter. So we need to make sure our employees are protected. What we've done in the past may no longer be sufficient. So what are the objectives of the training today? We're going to start with becoming aware of heat stress and the national emphasis program that OSHA has put out related to heat. We're going to reinforce the 4 steps to protect yourself against heat exposure. These handouts were provided by the Center for Construction Research and Training, and they are valuable toolbox talks you can utilize with your crews. We're going to talk about we want you to know how to utilize the OSHA NIOSH heat safety tool to predict the hazard level at your work sites and assess the resources on that same tool to react to heat exposure and medical emergencies. And then last but not least, know what steps we need to take to protect our employees from heat-related hazards. So I'd like to start with the National Emphasis Program on Heat. National emphasis programs are put out by OSHA targeting specific hazards that they believe are of higher risk. When they put out a national emphasis program, this gives them additional enforcement opportunities, different mechanisms for enforcement so that they can now go out and perform inspections that they may not have been able to in the past. So they can launch heat-related inspection on high-risk work sites, including the industry of construction. So if you have an outdoor or highly visible work site that OSHA may drive by during hot times, an inspection is not unlikely. The National Emphasis Program is going to encourage all employers to take the 5 steps necessary to protect their workers. Right? The first 3 seem pretty straightforward, right? Water, rest, and shade. These are necessary requirements that you need to provide your employees when working in the heat. We also need to make sure that our employees are adequately trained and that we look into acclimatization to make sure that as temperatures rise in the beginning of the year and when it's more likely to cause heat stress, that we're taking acclimatization steps to allow our workers to get used to that hot environment. So the National Emphasis Program is going to provide enforcement options and outreach compliance assistance. Right? Specifically, OSHA is going to be looking at heat priority days when the heat index is above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. They're going to engage in positive outreach, and they're going to engage in compliance assistance and enforcement. Right? They're going to be performing targeted inspections. When you have the National Weather Service state that there's a heat warning or a heat advisory for your area, you can expect OSHA to be out and performing inspections, both programmed inspections and inspections of sites that they see where they believe that heat stress may be an issue that's not being addressed. So what is the time frame? The National Emphasis Program went into effect on April 8th of this year, and it will remain in effect for 3 years unless canceled or extended by another directive. Now, OSHA currently does not have a standard on heat. Right? There are some state programs, Oregon, Cal, OSHA, both have heat stress programs. And there's actually, as of October of 21, a proposed rulemaking for heat injury and illness prevention. So the comment period for that ended in January, and we can expect in the near future a standard to be created. Up until then, OSHA is enforcing this national emphasis program and heat-related illness and injury through the general duty clause as a known hazard. So some of the resources that we can utilize are out there, right? The Center for Construction Research and Training has a good Toolbox Talk resource that you can utilize for training your frontline workers, your supervisors, superintendents and managers as well. So once again, I kind of touch on why we really need to do this. And it's dozens of fatalities. This happens across many industries. And often we do not realize how hazardous that environmental heat can be. We really need to make sure that these high severity outcomes don't happen. So the Center for Construction Research and Training, previously Center for Protecting Workers' Rights, has created a 4-step Toolbox Talk to protect employees. Right? It starts with knowing the warning signs, drinking water and taking breaks, when to seek medical assistance, and how to dress appropriately. So each of these Toolbox Talks come with a very quick and easily understood information that needs to be known. It tells you not only what activities are more likely to cause risk, but it's going to start with knowing what the warning signs are. It's extremely important that our frontline supervisors and our frontline workers really understand what the signs are of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat exhaustion is a dangerous condition, and heat stroke is a condition that can often lead to death. So we need to make sure that our employees out in the field are able to understand and recognize these symptoms. Next, we need to make sure that our employees are taking those frequent breaks and drinking enough water. So it's pretty straightforward. We need to be drinking about 3 cups of water an hour when we're up above 80 degrees in that heat index, right? We need to take frequent breaks out into the sun and not wait till we're thirsty to drink. And then obviously alcohol should not be drunk. And we should really avoid caffeine on these hot days because they do add to dehydration. We also need to make sure that your frontline supervisors and your employees are aware that when there's a heat stroke situation, it's a medical emergency. We need to call 911 when heat stroke symptoms appear. We need to make sure that those employees are promptly taken care of, promptly receive first aid, and receive emergency medical aid as well. And then other considerations we need to make sure we're looking at is how to dress appropriately in the sun. Right? We should be wearing those light colored to reflect that heat instead of absorbing it. Make sure it's loose fitting to help the evaporation of sweat and cool down of the body, and lightweight as possible. Now, if we're going to be wearing personal protective equipment, if we're doing sandblasting, abrasive blasting, or other lead abatement where we're wearing Tyvek suits, these are drastically going to impact our heat stress. So we need to make sure we may need to reschedule on those really hot days if we have high numbers of protective clothing that is going to limit that heat reduction. We also may need to utilize some other PPE if we're going to be wearing heavy PPE in the heat. There are cooling vests that are run on battery. There are cooling vests that are run by ice packs out of the freezer. There are options that we can utilize to help keep those employees cool. So by utilizing these toolbox talks, you can educate on a lot of those issues that OSHA wants us to, and also really lets our employees, our frontline employees and our frontline supervisors know what the hazards are and what the signs are, how to prevent it. So the next thing I want to talk about is another tool that you can utilize. This is an app that was put out by OSHA NIOSH, and it's very useful, doesn't take up much memory, and really is a great reference for frontline supervisors when dealing with heat. So at this point in time, I'd like you to go onto your app store and download this app to your phone so that we can walk through the app together. I suggest that you allow access to the location when using the app. That way it can tell you what the temperature is at your area, at your location. So please pause this for a moment, go ahead and review it, and then start it back up. All right, so we've gone ahead and downloaded this heat index app from OSHA NIOSH, the heat safety tool. Let's look at how we use it. If we start on that home page, it will tell us what our current heat index is. And it'll also state what the risk level is. So when I took this screenshot, it was early in the morning. It was below 60 degrees. So it says at a heat index below 60 degrees, there may be some risk involved when using heavy PPE or extreme physical exertion. And so it's going to alert you when those issues are going to rise up. And you do need to realize that direct sunlight can add 15 degrees to that heat index. And I know in the time I spent as a member of IUPAT, that south facing was the facing that got painted most often, right? And that heat is definitely going to be there. So if we go to our next tab, hourly, we have the ability to look forward up to 13 hours to see what the heat index will be hour by hour at our current location. And if we go ahead and click on the precautions, it will tell us what we need to do in order to protect our employees, right? So at 70 degrees, conditions are potentially hazardous. Alert workers to the heat index and provide that water and shade. It's also going to tell us to create a buddy system. And this is really something that is going to be required going forward when the standard does come out, and is a very good administrative control to protect our employees. So creating a buddy system so that workers look out for each other to make sure that they are not showing those signs and symptoms. Also, supervision needs to routinely check on their workers to encourage those water and rest breaks. Goes into other precautions, how we need to provide work and rest. It's going to talk about emergency planning and go into what steps we need to take, right? Do we have first aid available on site? Do we know where the nearest emergency medical system is? Do we have the address in case we do need to call 911? How are we going to guide that ambulance into the site if that's necessary? As we continue to click through, we'll see training. which will tell you what training we need to make sure we have already provided for our employees. Our next tab is symptoms. So down on the bottom bar, if we go to symptoms, this is very useful. This is a field reference for your frontline supervisors to know what the symptoms are for each of the 5 most common heat illnesses. Right, so, and this thing, we can look at the symptoms, see what they align with what our employees are dealing with, and then we can click review for first aid to go straight to the first aid for that illness. Additionally, we can go to our next tab where we have first aid. And the first aid tab is going to review what we need to do in an emergency related to each illness. Right? So for heat stroke, it's a medical emergency. We need to call 911. And the next point is really important. Stay with the worker until help arrives. I have heard too many anecdotes of situations where somebody was suffering from heat exhaustion or heat stroke, and they were either placed in the cab of a vehicle with the air conditioning running or sent to the construction trailer with the air conditioning running and left alone, only to be found hours later, unconscious, unresponsive, and possibly dead. We need to make sure that we have somebody stay with the employee if they suffer from heat stroke and heat exhaustion. And with both heat stroke and heat exhaustion, there should not be a rest period and then returning to work. Both of these are debilitating and need to be the end of the workday for that employee. Now, recently on a camping trip, there was a heat index above 100 while we're setting up camp. And my wife suffered from heat exhaustion, and I was not in heat exhaustion, but it was very close. I was taking my 15-minute breaks. I was drinking the water as I was supposed to be, but really the cognitive ability had dropped pretty significantly because of that heat. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of those employees. So those are the 4 tabs that we have, but let's go back to the home page. On the home page, we have another tool that can be utilized for hydration and rest reminders. If we click on that bell on the top menu, it'll bring us over to a hydration and rest timer. So if we're working in heat index that's very high, or we're wearing PPE in a heat index that will require it, we can set hydration and rest reminders on this alarm, and it will alarm off every 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, depending on how often those rest and hydration breaks are needed. We can set them for start time to end time, which days that we need it, and looking at the National Weather Service to see when our heat alert are coming out, we can go ahead and set these for our supervisors to make sure they're reminded of when to do it. So all in all, that heat safety tool from OSHA NIOSH is a very good tool as a reference for our frontline supervisors and for superintendents and management, so that they can know really what the steps we should be taking depending on what the current heat index or the heat index for that day will be. And knowing what we can do can really limit what those hazards are, what the impact is on our employees. So what else do we need to do? We need to create a heat stress program. This is a known hazard, and because it's a known hazard, we need to protect our employees from it through a written program. This program should have our responsibilities, what hazards there are that need to be mitigated, and how we're going to go about correcting those hazards. It should talk about what the heat-related illnesses are, and describe them and their treatment, and then what work practices we will utilize. And then last but not least, training, right? When we're going to train on it, when refresher training is needed. Now, we have created a heat stress program in the FCA manual. So the current FCA manual has a heat stress program, both for the US and our Ontario versions. So please, if you do not have a heat stress program in your manual, You can take this as a template, or you can use it to work and create your own. But it is important that we have that heat stress program in place. There are many different resources out there that we can utilize. OSHA has a poster that is available in both English and Spanish that we can utilize and we can put up to help inform our employees of what those protections are needed. And on the very top of this poster, you can see that it says ease into work. Acclimatization is really important when it comes to heat stress. Nearly 3 out of 4 fatalities related to heat illness happen during that first week of work, or that first week of work during a heat wave, when we have temperatures raised by 10 to 15 degrees and we have not been acclimated to that level of heat. And the acclimatization process generally relates to following the 20% rule. And the 20% rule is that we should not be working in that full heat for more than 20% of that first day, and raising that up by 20% each day until we get full acclimatization. So this is not necessary all summer long, but at the beginning of summer, when we really get into that hot season, we need to make sure that we're acclimatizing our employees. It also lists off your first aid, and prevention steps, and of course, what to do when a worker experiences things. So by having these posted, we can give those resources and reinforce the importance of taking those breaks. By and large, a lot of your frontline employees are going to try to muscle through and push through it, right? They're going to push through. We've always done it this way, and continue working despite those breaks. But it's important that we not only encourage them to take those breaks, but make sure that they are taking those breaks. Make sure that they are hydrating. Even those employees that only drink coffee or prefer the energy drink, that's hydration enough. We need to make sure that we push past that, that we provide the water and encourage and enforce the drinking of water and taking breaks in shade or cool. Now, a lot of the mask mandates have been lifted through in many areas, but we still have different areas where we are required to wear a mask to prevent COVID-19 from spreading. And this is definitely going to impact our heat illness. So we need to make sure we take that into consideration, right? When we're having wearing a face mask, that acclimatization becomes even more important because it's going to create more heat, right? Prioritize the cloth face coverings when possible over others to help limit that heat, and keeping that 6 feet distance and removing the mask when we have that 6 feet distance when possible. Right? We also will have to increase the frequency of the hydration and rest periods when we are wearing face masks. Face coverings are going to increase that heat and reduce our ability to reduce our own personal heat. There's also a info sheet put out by OSHA NIOSH, which can be posted to inform our workers. Now remember, our employees are used to working in heat, right? They've done it for years, but as they get older, they become more susceptible to heat illness, right? If they have had previous heat illness, they become more susceptible. There are many risk factors, and this specific info sheet talks about those risk factors to help alert employees to when they may be more at risk. So by providing this, we can help reinforce how important it is for employees to take care of themselves in those heat situations and prevent that heat illness. Fortunately, there are many different resources out there that we can utilize to help educate ourselves and educate our supervisors and frontline employees on how to protect themselves from heat illness. the tools are out there to make sure and ensure that our employees are protected from heat illness. So we will provide a PDF of this presentation that will have all these links on it so that you can go ahead and follow getting the resources you need, such as the Toolbox Talks from the Construction Research and Training Center, from the OSHA NIOSH Heat Tool, and all these other resources that OSHA has put a lot of time in creating to prevent heat illness. We may as well take advantage of that and utilize these resources to train our employees how to protect themselves from heat stress and make sure that we have the correct equipment and material on site to protect our employees. So finally, let's look at those objectives and make sure that we've covered everything. I believe that we've covered the awareness of heat stress and how important it is, how impactful it can be in your industry, and discussion of the national emphasis program OSHA has out, the increased enforcement that will be surrounding this issue. Reinforce the 4 steps of protecting yourself against heat exposure. These handouts from Construction Research and Training Center can be a very valuable toolbox talk to really focus in on the issue. We talked about how to utilize the OSHA NIOSH heat safety tool, protect the hazard level, and how to use the resources within that app to react to a heat exposure medical emergency, and how to recognize that heat exposure medical emergency. And lastly, we talked about the programs that you need to create, right? Knowing the steps of how to protect your employees from heat-related hazards. I really do suggest that if you do not have the heat safety program from the FCA manual, that you add that into your manual or use it as a template to create your own. It goes into detail specifically for what temperature ranges require what type of breakouts and hydration schedules. So it's a really valuable tool that you can utilize to make sure that you're in line. The standards currently do not have OSHA does not have a heat standard, although some of the state programs do. They are in the middle of proposed rulemaking for creating a heat illness and injury prevention standard. So we can expect that coming in the near future. Right now, it seems they'll most likely be in line with the Cal OSHA heat stress program standard. So let's make sure that we are taking the steps required to protect our employees from this possible fatal hazard. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Please reach out to the FCA Safety Helpline if you have any questions or comments, and if you want more information.